The gavel came down at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday in March. I remember the exact time because I looked at the clock the moment it happened, as if the timestamp would somehow make it more real, more permanent, more devastatingly official. Full custody to the mother. The judge said, not looking at me. Supervised visitation only, pending further evaluation. The father is to have no unsupervised contact with the minor child until such time as a psychological evaluation can be completed. The words hit me like a physical force. Full custody. Supervised visitation. No unsupervised contact with my daughter. My 8-year-old daughter. The child I had held in my arms the moment she was born. The child I had changed diapers for, read bedtime stories to, picked up from school every single day for the first 6 years of her life. My lawyer put a hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. I was staring at the judge, trying to understand how this had happened. Trying to understand how I had walked into this courtroom as a father and was now walking out as something else entirely. Something less. Something that required supervision and psychological evaluation before I could be trusted around my own child. I want to make clear, the judge continued, that based on the testimony provided by the mother and the child's own statements, there are serious concerns about the father's behavior and his fitness as a parent. The allegations of emotional abuse cannot be ignored. Emotional abuse. The words were like poison. I had never abused my daughter. I had never raised my voice to her. I had never done anything but love her with every fiber of my being. And yet, here was a judge, someone with the power to reshape my entire life, saying that I had emotionally abused her. How had we gotten here? The truth was that I had seen it coming. Not clearly, not in a way that I could have prevented it, but I had seen the signs. My wife, Jessica, had been distant for months. Not just emotionally distant, but strategically distant. She had started making comments to my daughter about how I was always stressed and how maybe it was better if she spent more time with mommy instead. She had started coaching my daughter, though I didn't know it at the time, telling her things about me that weren't true. Daddy doesn't really want to spend time with you, Jessica had allegedly told our daughter, according to the testimony I'd heard in court. He's too busy with his phone. It was a lie. I was never too busy for my daughter. Every evening when I came home from work, the first thing I did was spend time with her. We'd play games. We'd read books. We'd build things out of Lego. Jessica had taken those moments and twisted them into something sinister, something that made my love for my daughter sound like indifference. The worst part was that my daughter had testified against me in court. Not willingly, I understood that now. She had been coached. She had been manipulated. She had been turned into a weapon against her own father by the woman who was supposed to protect our relationship, not destroy it. I remembered the moment I first realized something was fundamentally wrong. It was about 6 months before the court hearing. Jessica had mentioned, casually, that my daughter had said something to her about me being mean to her. When I asked my daughter about it, she couldn't really articulate what she meant. She didn't have specific examples. She just knew that according to her mother, I was mean. At the time, I tried to address it. I tried to tell Jessica that she was poisoning our daughter against me. Jessica had denied it. She'd played the victim, claiming that I was being paranoid and aggressive, that my reaction to her innocent observation was proof that I had anger management issues. I should have seen what was happening. I should have documented everything. I should have fought harder to protect my relationship with my daughter before it was too late. But I hadn't. And now, at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday in March, the legal system had decided that my daughter was safer away from me, that my presence in her life was potentially damaging. that I needed to be supervised like a criminal before I could be trusted to be alone with my own child. I left the courthouse in a daze. I didn't speak to my lawyer. I didn't look at Jessica, who was standing outside the courthouse with a triumphant expression on her face. I didn't do anything except walk to my car and sit in the driver's seat for an hour, staring at nothing, trying to process the fact that my life had just been fundamentally altered by a judge who had listened to testimony from a child who had been coached and manipulated by her mother. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about my daughter, thinking about the next time I would see her, which would be in the presence of a court-appointed supervisor, thinking about how she would feel, knowing that her father had been deemed unsafe, thinking about what Jessica had done to her, to us, to our family. And I made a decision. I decided that I was going to fight back. I decided that I was going to prove that Jessica had lied. And I decided that I was going to get my daughter back. It took me 3 weeks to find the video. I'd been searching for anything I could use as evidence of Jessica's parental alienation. I'd been going through emails, text messages, any communication that might show her deliberately turning our daughter against me. I'd been documenting her manipulative behavior, taking screenshots, saving recordings of conversations where she said things that contradicted her court testimony. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected place. I was in my apartment. I'd moved out after the custody order, looking through files on an old laptop that I hadn't used in months. I was searching for photos of my daughter to print and hang on my wall, something to make the empty apartment feel less like a prison. And that's when I found it. A video file labeled Jane_playing_dress_up that I'd completely forgotten about. I'd recorded it almost a year ago, on my daughter's 7th birthday. Jessica had wanted to make a video for my daughter's birthday party. We'd recorded her singing Happy Birthday, dancing around, being silly in her dress-up clothes. I opened the file, and as I watched my daughter's face on the screen, I realized something that made my blood run cold. This video contained the answer to everything. This video was the proof I'd been looking for. The video was 45 minutes long. Most of it was what you'd expect, a 7-year-old being cute and silly. But there was a section, about 35 minutes in, where Jessica had been filming and had asked my daughter a question. "Who do you love more?" Jessica had asked, in a tone that I now recognized as manipulative. "Mommy or Daddy?" My daughter, at 7 years old, had hesitated. And then she'd said, "I love you both the same." "But if you had to choose," Jessica had continued, in that same syrupy sweet voice, "who would you want to spend more time with?" My daughter had looked uncomfortable. Mommy, I guess?" "Why is that?" Jessica had pressed. And then my daughter had said something that broke my heart. "Because Daddy is always busy. And he gets mad sometimes." And I realized in that moment that Jessica had been coaching her for months. Not aggressively, not obviously, but systematically, planting ideas in her head, creating false memories, building a narrative. But here's what was crucial. The video showed it. The video showed Jessica deliberately manipulating our daughter into saying things that were designed to drive a wedge between us. The video showed that my daughter's court testimony wasn't her authentic voice. It was a rehearsed performance of something Jessica had been teaching her to believe. I sat and watched that video 17 times. Each time, I felt something inside me break a little more. Each time, I became more certain that I had to use this video. I had to show it to a judge. I had to prove what Jessica had done. But I also knew that I had to be strategic. I couldn't just play the video and expect it to change everything. I needed a legal team. I needed a plan. I needed to understand exactly how to present this evidence in a way that would be most effective. I called my lawyer, Richard, the next morning. I found something, I said. I found proof that my wife has been systematically alienating my daughter from me. I found proof that my daughter's testimony was coached. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What kind of proof? Richard asked carefully. I told him about the video. I told him what it contained. I told him that Jessica had been deliberately manipulating our daughter in front of the camera and that the video was time-stamped and dated and completely authentic. This is significant, Richard said. This could potentially reverse the custody order. But we need to be careful about how we use it. We can't just spring it on the judge. We need to file it as evidence. We need to have it analyzed. We need to build a case around it. How long will that take? I asked. A few months, Richard said. But if what you're telling me is true, it will be worth the wait. A few months. I had to wait a few months before I could see my daughter without a supervisor present. A few months of court-appointed visitations where I had to sit across from my child with a stranger watching every interaction, every word, every gesture. A few months of knowing that she'd been poisoned against me and not being able to do anything about it. But I would wait, because the alternative was to give up. And I wasn't going to give up. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. Every supervised visitation was torture. I would sit across from my daughter, and I could see the distance in her eyes. I could see that she'd been taught to be wary of me. She wouldn't make eye contact. She wouldn't talk to me the way she used to. Everything felt strained and awkward, and it was all Jessica's doing. The supervisor, a woman named Patricia, who was appointed by the court, would sit in the corner taking notes. She was supposed to be there to protect my daughter, but what she was actually doing was documenting every interaction I had with my own child, looking for signs of the emotional abuse that Jessica claimed I was committing. The irony was that the emotional abuse was being committed by Jessica, not by me. My daughter was the one being abused. My daughter was the one being used as a weapon. My daughter was the one suffering. But I couldn't say that to anyone. I could only document it. I could only prepare my evidence. I could only wait for the day when I could present the video and prove the truth. Richard worked tirelessly to build the case. He had a forensic expert analyze the video to confirm that it was authentic and unedited. He had a child psychologist review the video and write a statement about the signs of parental alienation that were evident in Jessica's behavior and my daughter's responses. He documented every inconsistency in Jessica's testimony, the contradictions between what she'd said in court and what she was saying in my conversations with her, the changing narrative about what my daughter had supposedly said about me. By the time we were ready to file our appeal, we had a compelling case. We had forensic evidence. We had expert testimony. We had the video. And we had a strategy. The strategy was simple. We would present the evidence in a way that made it impossible for the judge to deny what had happened. We would show the video to Jessica first in open court to give her the opportunity to respond. And then we would let the judge decide what to do with the truth. There's a risk here, Richard warned me. When we show her that video, when she realizes that you have proof of what she's been doing, she might react emotionally. She might try to spin the narrative. She might claim that the video is out of context or manipulated, or that you edited it to make her look bad. Can she claim that? I asked. The forensic expert will have already testified that the video is authentic, Richard said. So technically, no. But that won't stop her from trying. I was prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for was the visceral reaction I would have when I finally got to play that video in open court. What I wasn't prepared for was seeing the moment when Jessica realized that her entire strategy had been exposed. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in June, 3 months after the initial custody order. 3 months of supervised visitations. 3 months of watching my daughter pull away from me while her mother systematically destroyed our relationship. I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer, and I tried not to make eye contact with Jessica. She was sitting at the other counsel table, wearing a navy suit, looking composed and confident. She had no idea what was coming. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The judge sat, and everyone else sat down. And then Richard stood up and asked to present new evidence that had come to light since the initial custody determination. Jessica's lawyer objected. He claimed that this was a delay tactic, that we'd had ample time to present evidence initially, that bringing new evidence now was unfair to his client. But the judge overruled the objection. The judge said that if the evidence was substantive and relevant, she wanted to see it. Richard called his forensic expert first. The expert testified about the video, how it was authentic, how it hadn't been edited or manipulated, how it was time-stamped and dated. The expert talked about the markers of parental alienation that were evident in the interaction between Jessica and my daughter on the video. Then Richard called the child psychologist. The psychologist testified about the signs of coached testimony in my daughter's court statements. The psychologist talked about how children who have been subjected to parental alienation often exhibit specific behavioral patterns and linguistic cues that suggest they've been influenced by the alienating parent. Jessica's lawyer cross-examined both experts, but he didn't have much to work with. The evidence was airtight. The video existed. The expert testimony was sound. All he could do was try to muddy the waters, to suggest that the video was being misinterpreted, to claim that Jessica had been asking innocent questions. And then it was time. "Your Honor," Richard said, "I'd like to play the video for the court. I believe it's necessary for the judge to see, firsthand, the interaction between the mother and the child that led to the child's testimony against the father." Jessica's lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I want to see this," the judge said. The video was queued up. The lights were dimmed. And then my daughter's face appeared on the screen, 7 years old, in her dress-up clothes, singing happy birthday to herself. For the first 35 minutes, it was innocent. It was cute. It was the kind of video that any parent would be proud to show. And then Jessica asked the question, "Who do you love more, mommy or daddy?" I watched my daughter's face on the screen. I watched her hesitate. I watched her struggle with the question that her mother had put her in a position to answer. And I thought about how manipulative Jessica had been, how deliberately cruel she was being by putting our daughter in that position. "I love you both the same," my daughter said. "But if you had to choose," Jessica continued, and even through the video speakers, you could hear the pressure in her voice. "Who would you want to spend more time with?" And I watched Jessica's face on the screen as she waited for the answer she'd been training our daughter to give. Mommy, I guess," my daughter said, uncertain. "Why's that?" Jessica pressed. And that's when Jessica's voice came through the speakers, asking the leading question, planting the seed. "Because Daddy is always busy. And he gets mad sometimes." The courtroom was absolutely silent. You could hear the video audio, but otherwise, there was complete silence. The judge was leaning forward in her chair. Jessica's lawyer was very still, realizing that the game was up. And then Jessica herself made a sound, a small, choked sound. When I looked at her, her face had gone completely white. The video ended. The lights came back up. And then Jessica lost it. "That's not what happened," she screamed, standing up so quickly that her chair fell backward. "That's a lie. That's a manipulation. You're taking that out of context." The judge banged her gavel. "Sit down, Ms. Wife's last name. You will have your opportunity to respond to this evidence." That video is not representative of what I was trying to do. Jessica continued, tears streaming down her face now, her voice getting louder and more hysterical. "I was just asking questions. I was just trying to understand what she was feeling." "Sit down," the judge repeated more forcefully. "He's destroyed everything," Jessica screamed. "He's turned this video into something it's not. I never did anything wrong. I only wanted what was best for my daughter." She was full-on hysterical now. She was screaming and crying and denying everything, even though the video spoke for itself. Her lawyer was trying to get her to sit down. The bailiff was moving toward her, ready to physically remove her if necessary. And I sat there, watching the woman I'd been married to, watching her completely fall apart as the truth was exposed. And I felt something. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not quite. But something. A vindication. A validation that what I'd known all along was true. "I want her removed from the courtroom," the judge said coldly. "She can return once she's composed herself." The bailiff escorted Jessica out. She was still screaming, still denying, still claiming that I'd manipulated the video, still insisting that she'd done nothing wrong. When she was gone, the judge looked at me, and then looked at Richard, and then looked at her notes. "This is significant," the judge said. "This is very significant. I want to see that video analyzed one more time. I want a full report from the forensic expert. And I want the child psychologist to provide a detailed assessment of the parental alienation evident in this video." "Your Honor," Richard said, "we have all of that documentation available for you to review." The judge nodded. "I'm going to take this under advisement. But I want to tell you right now that what I saw in that video was extremely concerning. I saw a mother deliberately coaching her child to speak negatively about her father. I saw manipulation. I saw parental alienation. And I'm not pleased about it." She looked directly at me. For the first time since the beginning of this process, a judge was looking at me with something other than suspicion. "I will issue a new order within 10 days, the judge said. "In the meantime, the current custody arrangement remains in effect. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. Section 5. Justice and Reclamation. The new custody order came down on a Friday morning. Richard called me to tell me before the official paperwork arrived. "You won," he said simply. "Full custody to the father. Mother gets supervised visitation, pending a psychological evaluation." I felt something inside me shift. It was like the reverse of that moment in the courtroom, months ago, when the judge had stripped away my rights. It was the moment when those rights were returned to me. It was vindication. The order stated that based on the evidence presented, the video, the forensic analysis, the expert testimony, the court had determined that the mother had engaged in systematic parental alienation and had manipulated the child in an attempt to damage the father-child relationship. The order stated that this behavior constituted a form of emotional abuse directed at both the child and the father. Jessica was ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation. She was ordered to attend parenting classes. She was ordered to have supervised visitation with our daughter. And she was ordered to cease any behavior that constituted parental alienation. I was awarded primary custody. Full, unsupervised custody. The right to make all major decisions about our daughter's education, healthcare, and well-being. My daughter came home to my apartment 2 weeks later. I'd fixed the place up in anticipation. I'd painted her room. I'd bought new furniture for her. I'd decorated the walls with pictures of us, Pictures from before Jessica had poisoned her mind against me. When she walked through the door, she was hesitant. She was uncertain. She didn't know how to be around me anymore because her mother had told her for so long that I was someone to be afraid of. But I was patient. I didn't rush her. I didn't try to be the fun parent or the cool parent. I just let her settle in. I answered her questions honestly when she asked them. And slowly, over weeks and months, I watched the real relationship between us begin to rebuild. It took a long time. It took therapy. It took me explaining to her that what her mother had done was wrong, that I had never been the things her mother had told her I was, that her mother had been sick and had needed help, and that wasn't her daughter's fault. My daughter cried a lot during those first months. She cried because she'd been confused. She cried because she'd been hurt. She cried because she'd been used as a weapon in her mother's war against me. But she also gradually started to remember who I was. She started to remember the bedtime stories and the Lego buildings and the after-school time we'd spent together. She started to remember that her father loved her. Jessica complied with the court order, though I'm sure it killed her. She attended her psychological evaluation, which confirmed that she had engaged in parental alienation and had issues with emotional manipulation and control. She attended parenting classes. She had her supervised visitation with our daughter, which my daughter attended less and less frequently as she got older, and was able to express her preferences to the court. By the time our daughter was 12, she barely spent any time with her mother. She didn't want to. And eventually, the court allowed her to choose whether or not she wanted to spend time with Jessica, and she chose not to. That was difficult for me in some ways. I had no love for Jessica, but I also didn't want my daughter to grow up resenting her mother. I encouraged our daughter to eventually reconcile with Jessica to try to build some kind of relationship with her. And eventually, years later, they did. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. But they found some way to coexist that was manageable for both of them. As for me, that video became the most important document in my life. It became the proof that I needed to reclaim my daughter. It became the evidence that exposed the truth. It became the weapon that I used to fight back against someone who had tried to destroy me. I learned something profound from this entire experience. I learned that when the system fails you, when the people who are supposed to protect the vulnerable instead empower those who would manipulate them, you have to find another way. You have to document everything. You have to gather evidence. You have to be willing to fight. I learned that parental alienation is a form of abuse. I learned that it happens more often than people realize. I learned that it's devastating to both the alienated parent and the alienated child. But I also learned that truth is power. I learned that when you have evidence of the truth, when you have documentation that proves your narrative, when you have experts willing to testify on your behalf, you can overcome even the most unfair court order. That video is still saved on my computer. Multiple copies. Multiple backups. I've never deleted it. I've shown it to my therapist. I've explained it to my daughter. I've used it as a teaching tool to help her understand what happened to her, why it happened, and that it wasn't her fault. If I could give advice to anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, it would be this. Document everything. Take videos. Save emails. Keep records of conversations. Build a file of evidence. Because when you're fighting for your child, when you're fighting against accusations that could take your child away from you, evidence is your only weapon. That video saved my relationship with my daughter. It saved my custody rights. It exposed the truth about what my wife had been doing. And it proved that no matter how clever someone is, no matter how well they think they're hiding their manipulation, the truth eventually comes out. I found mine in a file I'd forgotten I had. I don't know what form it will take for you, But I know that it's out there. I know that the truth is always there, waiting to be discovered. And I know that if you're willing to fight for it, willing to document it, willing to present it in court, the truth can set you free. It set me free, and it gave me back my daughter.